Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. I want to talk a little bit about this myth that boxing is somehow dying or on life support, or, it's never been worse than it is in 2024. On the contrary, boxing is thriving. And the very idea that it is under the cosh, that it's in danger of dying out, of being usurped by things like, MMA, UFC and all that stuff, is a complete fantasy. Now, whenever I talk to people about this and they insist, boxing's in the sewer, invariably they seem to be people who are either much younger, and therefore an old fighter to them would be someone like Bernard Hopkins or Roy Jones, or they have no grasp of boxing history. Now, look, I'm no historian. I think that word you've got to earn that word to be a historian. I've read thousands of boxing magazines since I was a kid, and I've read probably hundreds of books on the subject. But I wouldn't consider myself a historian. I think a historian is someone that does their own research and work and, unearths new facts and perhaps corrects something that is a long-standing assumption or belief, and provide some sort of evidence that the contrary was true. In other words, they contribute to the overall recorded history of the sport. I've never done that, but I do know a lot about boxing, and I know a fair bit about boxing history because I've read so many damn magazines, and seen so many documentaries and done all the rest of it. And I just fell in love with the sport when I was very, very young. So first of all, let's look at how long boxing has been around in the gloved form, which is the Marquess of Queensberry's rules. Well, the last fight under the old London prize ring rules was John O'Sullivan against Jake Kilrain, which was won by O'Sullivan in 75 rounds. And O'Sullivan and Kilrain sort of bridged that gap between the old and the new, Kilrain would go back to the days of Jem Smith, someone who was purely a pioneer prior to the gloved rules. I don't think Jem Smith fought into the gloved era. No, he was of course he didn't, he was too young. Was he? Very good. I know he was heavyweight champion of England, but no. Anyway, my mind's wandering. And that was that fight, that 75-round stoppage on behalf of John O'Sullivan over Jake Kilrain was in, 1889. So boxing, that was the last fight that predates, the last heavyweight fight that predates Marquess of Queensberry's rules. So Marquess of Queensberry's rules fighting has been around for 135 years. Okay, if you think that 135 years of history can just be eradicated because, a couple of fights aren't getting made, or a few promoters are acting like arseholes, or, the gloved era, the Marquess of Queensberry rules era, 135 years has survived, 2 world wars, the very heavy influence of the mob in the 50s, Blinky Palermo, and it's survived all sorts of scandals. It survived the proliferation of titles. In one form or another, boxing exists. It also survived in its earliest years, the colour bar, because you had the black or the coloured heavyweight title, which was people like George Godfrey held it, and who's the other one I want to think of? Let me think of some that held it. George Godfrey, Charles Hartley, something like that. I can't remember his bloody name. I should have done my research, shouldn't I? It's going to come to me in a minute. I know it will. And then you had, Sam Langford, who was not. It was even denied a shot at the proper title, the proper heavyweight title, and arguably is the best fighter ever. A lot of people feel that is true if you analyse his record, even though he was little bigger than a modern day super middleweight. I think it was Hadley. Charles Hadley was one of the coloured heavyweight champs. But all these guys, it survived that racism. Let's call it what it is. That sort of blatant racism era. And it survived all sorts of scandals, and it survived deaths, and it survived, like I say, 2 world wars. It survived all sorts of stuff, and it's still around. Now, a lot of people say, well, why do you why do you think that boxing has survived? To which I say, well, I think of all the combat sports, it is the most beautiful. And I think it's the best. I don't quite go into this idea that it's a science, the sweet science. To me, it's not really that scientific. I mean, fundamentally, there are only 4 punches. You got your jab, you got your hook, you got the cross or the straight, and you got the uppercut. And all right, you can throw a bolo punch in there or some sort of hybrid punch maybe, but there are fundamentally just four punches. And you could say that the combatants, to use the phrase, their hands are tied, to use that phrase. In actual fact, their hands are just about the only thing that aren't tied. I mean, they can move their feet, but they're not allowed to headbutt, they're not allowed to kick, they're not allowed to elbow, you're not allowed to punch below the waist, you're not allowed to rabbit punch, I know a lot of people, everyone from Elmer Ray to Bernard Hopkins to Sandy Sadler. I mean, there have been plenty of people throughout the ages that have been really dirty bastards, but those are the rules. And I think for me personally, that's the appeal of boxing, is that you're only allowed to operate within a very, very narrow confine of what is legitimate, what's legal and what isn't. And I think that unlike, say, something like MMA and UFC, now I'm not slagging those things off at all. Those guys are hard bastards. I mean, sometimes I watch MMA and I think, Jesus Christ, how are these guys not killing each other? They probably are killing each other, but I find that whole thing. I watch it through between winces, between grimaces, but it doesn't hold the appeal of boxing because, as I say, boxing is violence in its most stripped down, confined, and therefore, in inverted commas, civilized format. There's no rolling around on the floor. I've got 2 fists on the end of my arms, and I'm only allowed to use them, and therefore, it's the noblest of art, the noblest of violence, if violence can ever be considered noble. Now, I don't know what you think. I don't know what your opinion is. And I'd like to hear your opinion on it. What do you think of boxing? What do you think of the history of boxing? Do you know anything about the history of boxing? Are you interested in the history of boxing? Maybe not that interested. Maybe just like the modern day stuff. But why do you think it's lasted for 135 years? And why do you think it continues to thrive? The most recent thing is the Saudi money's come along. So now that's, the whole place is awash with Saudi money. If you go back 30 years, it was, Las Vegas was the place to be. Madison Square Gardens had its place, Even on the domestic scene, the UK domestic scene, you'd have Wembley Pool and you'd have different venues which are now long gone. And you get huge crowds. I mean, Henry Cooper fought in front of 50,000 people. He's only British and European Commonwealth champ, but it has an appeal. It has that great appeal. Even today, it has a great appeal. Even though it's sort of like considered a cult sport or a niche sport, it isn't really. I mean, it's still, when you look at the big events and when you look at the amount of cards that are on every week in just Britain alone, small hall cards, there's always something going on. So it has some sort of appeal from grassroots level right up to the big arenas and stadiums. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's lasted so long? But that to me is the appeal of it. Like I was saying, you're limited, you can only use your fists, that's your lot. And I'm not having a go at martial arts or other combat sports at all. I'm just explaining to you why I think boxing is the best of the lot, and why I've had a sort of lifelong personal romance with it. I love it. So yeah, leave your thoughts below. Let me know what you think. And yeah, just if you're new to the channel, and you could subscribe. If you like the video, hit the like button. I'd appreciate that. Spread the word about Joe Stunner Boxing. I always appreciate that as well. And I'm looking forward to reading your comments. All right, bye for now.